Colonel, I think it's also very important to talk about the significance, because you brought up Secretary Blinken. The idea that he deliberately lied regarding Israel withholding aid to Gaza. And we've been talking at great length about, yes, there is a reason why, despite what is being reported, several 100,000 people have been murdered on behalf of what Israel has done to Gaza and the West Bank. What isn't being talked about is the famine, disease, things that have happened as a result of this, and the fact that Blinken knew that Israel was deliberately facilitating this mass killing through disease.
You surprised?
I'm not surprised.
That he lied. I feel like that they're lying if their lips are moving.
Well, you've been through weapons of mass destruction. So I'm asking you, Colonel, do you think anything will come of this for Secretary Blinken? Will he be the fall guy, if you will?
Any accountability?
Well, on a specious set of circumstances, I think the chairman of the previous chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, now the chairman of Foreign Affairs in the House, is trying to indict him for not appearing in front of his committee on the Afghanistan investigation. At the same time, there will be some results, I think, some repercussions. I don't know if they'll be significant and they'll really hold him accountable, but he's broken the law. Now, President Biden has stood by while he broke the law, but there are numerous occasions where he has actually broken U.S. law, most formidably with regard to arms going to Israel, because the law is very clear that you don't give arms to a country that is violating the humanitarian regulations and rules associated with those arms. And he's done it multiple times, as you were just suggesting. So Blinken is a war criminal right now, as sure as Tony Bibi Netanyahu is a war criminal. Blinken is a war criminal, and could be taken to task for it if we had any courage and any moral rectitude is the best term to use, I think. But we don't, and I don't think there'll be any accountability for any of this. But there definitely should be.
I could see him having to resign. Like, I could see them pushing him out, but that's I don't think any real consequences. Like, when you're a war criminal, there should actually be, like, criminal consequences. So having to resign is not exactly. I actually have a question for you regarding that pager incident that just happened last week, and obviously
also a war crime.
I was going to say, like, anywhere else, if that were in a white Euro country, we'd be calling it terrorism. So it's just crazy. But how is it possible that they could do that without our intelligence people knowing that was coming? How could they do that without them?
Remember, now you're talking to the guy who sat in the bowels of the CIA for 7 days and 7 nights, and they told us we. So I'm not a defender of our intelligence people. At the same time, let me say that I've since discovered that down in the bowels of the CIA, there were people who George Tenet would not allow to get up to Secretary Powell or to me, who were telling the truth. They were essentially saying Saddam Hussein had no weapons of mass destruction and certainly no nuclear weapons program. But it never got up through George Tenet and John McLaughlin and so forth. But I don't have a lot of respect for the U.S. intelligence community. On the other hand, I have enormous respect for Mossad and in terms of their operational capability and the way they operate and get information. So I think this was mostly Mossad. In fact, I would almost be willing to say it was 95% Mossad, and they told us as an afterthought.
But I think it happened. But we knew before it happened.
Well, I think they told us maybe as it was happening or just before it happened. We weren't in any way disposed to stop it, but they didn't give us time either. Same with the assassination in Tehran, of all places, of Ismail Haniyeh. Which was just egregious. I listened to the new Iranian president the other day, yesterday, as a matter of fact, who is a different kind of individual. I know we've had some so-called not conservative presidents in Iran, but this gentleman is a different sort altogether. And his principal purpose in coming in, and he hasn't abandoned it, is to go ahead and get a nuclear agreement with the United States and stop his nuclear program as a consequence, and get sanctions lifted because the Iranian people are truly suffering. And he wants to do something about it. And he sees this whole war as stopping him from doing that. And his remarks were from the heart, I think, about this. He doesn't want a war with the United States. He knows Washington doesn't want a war with him. I don't think Bibi Netanyahu even can go to send a war with Iran. That'll be a showstopper for him. That's not to say he won't try and make it as egregious as he possibly can, but I think it's a showstopper with us. And so look what we're preparing to do. We're preparing to do something that will make it inevitable that Iran has to come to Hezbollah's defense, and that'll start the chain. And we'll be off to the races for not just Ukraine having the potential for a regional and ultimately a world war, but also Gaza. Both theaters now have the potential to spread dramatically and bring a lot of people in who have, for example, nuclear weapons.
Yeah. I mean, to me, they're just obviously they're wanting that. And Netanyahu has his own personal reasons. Obviously, he's doing what he needs to do, I guess, to stay there and survive. And he really doesn't care about his own people, clearly. I mean, he doesn't.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think the only person that Bibi Netanyahu cares about is Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah. Oh, he's Mussolini. But I wanted to ask you, and this is this is something that I think you could really speak to, because we have had the privilege and the pleasure of having General Clark on our podcast as well. I'm still not 100% sure that I fully understand what the obsession with Iran is and why this has basically become sort of like the end game, if you will, for the neoliberal establishment in DC politics. Can you shed some light on why Iran is so significant from the standpoint of our State Department as well as Israel?
This is going to sound somewhat bizarre to you probably, but I think it's the truth. There are other reasons, of course, but I think this is fundamentally the truth with people like John Bolton, Victoria Nuland, Richard Pearl, a host of other neoconservatives who sort of led the government or are still leading the government.
Yeah.
They hate Iran. They hate Iran for the hostages. They hate it for the 440 plus days. They hate it for having defied the United States of America and gotten away with it. They hate it for everything it's done since then. And they will not rest until it is unseated in terms of the theocracy. And that's their whole motivation. And they're dedicated to that. I saw John Bolton up close and personal in the State Department. They're dedicated to that. They want Iran gone from the face of the earth as a theocracy and back as a vassal state of the United States, which is essentially what it was under the Shah. They feel like that was an abridgment of American power that cannot be tolerated or allowed to exist. And they've got to justify it. They've got to rectify it. That's the way they feel. And they have far too much influence on the U.S. government, because I know the military, the basic fundamental military, C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, on down, they don't want a war with Iran. They understand how bad that would be ultimately. It's a nation of 90 million people. It has great strategic depth. Every one of those persons would become, if we invaded, an enemy of us. Think of Iraq. Think of Afghanistan. Oh. Think of 20 years and $10 trillion and no victory at the end of the 20 years. That's what we're looking at if we tried to take on Iran in a visceral sort of way. And the only way you get to their nuclear program, we have learned, you don't bomb it. All they do is go deeper underground. The only way you get to it is put troops on the ground and root it out. And that would be an absolute disaster. And thank God the military and others know that and don't want a war with Iran any more than they want a war with us. Bibi is the fly in the ointment there.